Ever notice how like some people you just kind of click with and others you don't?
Yeah,
Like, is it some sort of secret formula?
right.
Well, we're doing a deep dive today into like attraction.
Mm.
And specifically, we're going to look at like how age preferences
Oh, okay.
play into like who we find appealing.
Gotcha.
And I know attraction is way more complex than just numbers on a chart.
Right.
But I think like looking at these broad patterns might offer some interesting insights.
Yeah,
Ready
definitely.
to unpack this together?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay.
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Watch 'em all drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
Ever scroll through like a dating app and
Yeah.
wonder why some age ranges just seem to be like the sweet spot for different people? It's so interesting, right? We're going deep today into age and attraction, and I think it's way more complicated than most people think.
Yeah, it really is. It goes way beyond just like individual preferences, right?
Yeah.
It's like these bigger societal patterns that are like shaping how we view relationships and even ourselves.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit.
Yeah.
The source material for this deep dive is an article called The Age of Attraction, Unpacking Gendered Patterns and Partner Preferences. And it's got these two graphs that really caught my eye, I have to say. They basically map out men's and women's typical age preferences when it comes to partners. And let me tell you, just looking at these visuals, I think it challenges a lot of assumptions.
Definitely. The contrast between them is striking. The first one, it's called a woman's age versus the age of the men who look best to her. And it shows this diagonal line. So basically this means that women tend to prefer men who are slightly older when they're younger, but as they get older, their preference kind of aligns more closely with their own age. So like a 20-year-old woman might be drawn to someone like around 23, but by the time she's 50, she's probably looking for someone more in her own age bracket.
So women's preferences actually shift over time.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. But then we look at the second graph. It's called a man's age versus the age of the women who look best to him. And it's a completely different picture.
Right.
This one's almost a flat line. It just hovers around women in their early 20s, regardless of the man's age. Like, it doesn't seem to matter if he's 30, 40, even older.
Exactly. And that brings up this really crucial question. What is driving this huge difference? The article really digs into some explanations, and it's not as simple as just like, saying, oh, men are shallow. There's some deeper stuff going on.
Yeah. I've heard that whole evolutionary psychology thing before. Men are seeking fertile partners. Women are seeking providers. It always felt a little too simplistic to me, though.
I think you're right to be skeptical about that. It definitely offers like one piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole story. That's where things like societal norms and cultural influences come in. That whole half your age plus 7 rule.
Oh, yeah.
Totally not scientific. But it kind of weirdly reflects this idea that there's like a socially acceptable formula for age gaps.
That's so funny because I actually know that rule, but I never really stopped to think about where it came from or like if it actually means anything in reality. So is it really just like a made-up guideline?
It is, but it does seem to mirror some real-world trends. The average age gap in couples is only like 2 to 3 years with the men being older. But here's the interesting part. That gap can change like so much across different cultures.
So it's like biology might nudge us in a certain direction, but then culture comes in and kind of takes the wheel and steers us to all these different destinations. It's like there's this whole set of unspoken rules about age and relationships that we all kind of absorb without even realizing it.
For sure. And those rules are so deeply ingrained. It's really interesting. One way the article kind of tackles this whole complexity is by exploring these trends from both a woman's and a man's perspective.
Okay, I'm really curious about this. Let's start with the women. So those shifting preferences that we saw in that first graph, could that actually be seen as empowering in some way?
I think it definitely could. As women become more established in their careers and lives, their priorities might change. They might be looking for different qualities in a partner, maybe less emphasis on like age or financial stability. and more on, emotional connection and shared experiences.
That makes total sense. It's not just about finding a provider anymore, right? And haven't we seen a shift in those societal norms anyway? I mean, we even have terms now like cougar for older women dating younger men. Does the article address that at all?
It does. It actually highlights the rise of cougar relationships as evidence that these norms are definitely changing. But we do have to be careful with terms like that cougar can have both positive and negative connotations. So it's like a good example of how language itself reflects these evolving dynamics, which are sometimes controversial.
So cougar might be a catchy term, but it's also got some baggage with it. It makes you think about how we label and categorize relationships based on age, which can get pretty messy. What about the flip side, though? So the article mentioned that men's emotional maturity might lag behind women's. Could that be why younger women initially prefer those slightly older partners?
That's a fascinating point. Research actually does suggest that there could be a developmental difference there. It's not to say that all men mature slower, but on average, younger women might be seeking out partners with a little bit more life experience. So this adds another layer to why women's preferences change over time. As they mature, that maturity gap becomes less significant.
This is really making me reconsider some of my own assumptions. But now I'm even more curious about the men. That flat line on their graph is a little harder to explain away. Is it really all just about men being fixated on youth and beauty?
I think it's definitely more nuanced than that. The article does acknowledge that younger partners can be seen as status symbols for men, but it also really digs into the intense societal pressures that men face. Think about it. Media constantly bombards us with images of older men paired with much younger women.
Oh, yeah. Now that you mention it, I can think of a ton of examples. It's almost like a Hollywood cliche at this point.
It's more than just a cliche, though. It actually reinforces these patterns and makes them seem normal. Leonardo DiCaprio always dating women under 25 is like a perfect example. Makes you wonder, are men really making genuinely free choices here? Or are they being subtly influenced by these really deep-seated cultural expectations?
Wow, that's a really good point. And I bet it ties into those anxieties that men face about aging. No one wants to feel past their prime, and society definitely sends a lot of messages about what's considered attractive, especially for women.
It all comes back to this idea that men might feel this pressure to chase youth as a way to kind of defy aging. On the other hand, women are often told their value decreases with age, so they might actually become more confident and self-assured as they get older. It's like two totally different experiences of aging.
Okay, mind blown. So are we saying that men are kind of stuck in this loop of chasing youth while women are like breaking free and redefining what they find attractive?
We do have to be careful about generalizing too much. Remember, these are general trends, not hard and fast rules. Plenty of men don't fit this pattern. And attraction is ultimately super complex. It's this mix of personal experiences, values, and that all-important chemistry. But these graphs do give us a lot to think about. They show how these bigger forces could be shaping our perceptions without us even realizing it.
That's what I love about these deep dives. They make you step back and see things from a whole new perspective. So we've talked about the graphs, but I'm ready to go deeper into the why behind these patterns.
Yeah.
The article mentions biology, society, and psychology as all playing a role. Let's break those down. Where do we even begin?
Yeah, it's a tangled web for sure.
Yeah.
But let's start with the biology piece. The evolutionary perspective basically argues that men are driven to spread their genes, and women in their early 20s are at peak fertility. So the attraction, from a purely biological standpoint, makes a certain amount of sense.
Okay, I can see that. But wouldn't that mean that men would lose interest as women get older? The graph doesn't really show that, though.
Exactly. And that's where the limitations of just the biological argument come in. It doesn't fully explain why men in their 50s, 60s, even older would still gravitate towards those women in their early 20s. They're not exactly in their prime baby-making years at that point.
So what's filling in that gap then? Is it just that societal conditioning you were talking about before?
It plays a huge role for sure. Traditional gender roles, which are, still very much present in our culture, are a big part of it. Men are often raised to be providers and protectors, while women are socialized to be more nurturing and often financially dependent. So these roles can kind of subconsciously reinforce this idea that men should be with younger, maybe more dependent partners.
And those messages are everywhere. It's not just our upbringing either. It's movies, TV shows, even commercials. They constantly pair older men with much younger women. It's creating this image of what's considered desirable and successful. You rarely see the reverse.
It's almost like this self-perpetuating cycle. Biology might create a little initial preference, but then society comes in and just amplifies it. Through media cultural norms, even our own internalized beliefs about what's normal in a relationship.
It makes me think about how we perceive power dynamics in relationships, too.
Yeah.
Historically, older men held more economic power, which might have factored into their ability to attract younger partners.
That's a really important point. Economic factors can't be ignored, but as women gain more financial independence, that dynamic starts to shift. The article actually suggests that this could be one reason why women's preferences are changing. They no longer need to prioritize financial security as much as they might have in the past.
So they're more free to choose partners based on other things, like shared values or intellectual compatibility. That makes a lot of sense. But we've talked a lot about these external factors. What about the psychology of age and attraction? Does the article go into that at all?
It does, and it gets really interesting here. So for women, the shifting preferences on that graph could reflect their evolving needs and priorities as they age. In their 20s, they might be focused on finding a stable partner who can provide security. But as they get older and gain more experience, their priorities might shift more towards emotional connection, shared interests, intellectual stimulation.
So it's less about like checking off boxes
Mm-hmm.
and more about finding someone who really aligns with them on like a deeper level.
Exactly. And for men, that fixed preference for youth could be tied to anxieties about aging and masculinity. Society often equates youth with virility and success for men. So a younger partner might be seen as a way to kind of hold on to those feelings, almost like a validation of their own attractiveness and desirability.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if some men are almost trying to defy time by being with someone younger, whereas women who are often told their value declines with age might actually find that they become more confident and self-assured as they get older. It's like society sends such different messages to men and women about aging.
It's like these two totally different trajectories, as the article describes it. Women are often pressured to stay youthful, while men are encouraged to embrace their silver fox status. It's a double standard for sure that definitely contributes to these patterns we're seeing in the graphs.
This has been so eye-opening.
Yeah.
But are we saying that we're all just slaves to our biology and societal conditioning, that there's no escaping these trends?
Not at all. I think it's really important to remember that these graphs just represent general trends, not a rule book for how everyone should behave. And just because society kind of pushes us in a certain direction doesn't mean we have to follow blindly. There are tons of people who break the mold and find love outside of these patterns.
That's really reassuring to hear, because at the end of the day, attraction is such a personal and multifaceted experience.
Yeah.
You can't just reduce it down to age or societal expectations. It's about so much more. Personality, shared values, common interests, that spark of connection that you just can't force or predict.
You're totally right. While these graphs are like a fascinating starting point for understanding these bigger dynamics, they shouldn't be taken as a guide for how anyone should feel or behave. We're all individuals with our own unique experiences and preferences.
Yeah, this whole conversation is making me think that maybe the most important thing is just awareness. If we can recognize how these societal messages and biases might be influencing us, maybe we can start to challenge them and make more conscious choices about who we're attracted to and why.
Yeah.
So are we saying that these graphs are like just interesting trivia then? Or is there actually something more we can take away from all of this?
I think the real value is in seeing how intertwined biology, society, and psychology all are when it comes to attraction. It's not just one or the other. It's this super complex interplay of all of those things.
It's like those graphs are holding up a mirror to our culture in a way. And they're showing us how all of these like unspoken expectations and biases are influencing our ideas of what's attractive and desirable without us even realizing it.
Exactly. And that awareness is so powerful. Once we start to understand those forces that are at play, then we can start to question them and, make more conscious choices.
So it's not about judging other people for their preferences, but rather it's about understanding that bigger picture.
Yeah.
And maybe even challenging those norms that might be limiting our choices or, making us feel bad about ourselves.
Yeah, that's a really key point. I think we need to move away from these rigid ideas about age and attractiveness and really embrace the idea that attraction is a spectrum, not like a set of rules.
Yeah.
There's beauty in diversity.
Absolutely well said. We've covered so much today. Those intriguing graphs, the potential reasons behind those patterns, these gender differences and this whole complex interplay of biology, society, and psychology. As we kind of wrap things up, I'm curious what stood out to you most in all of this. Did anything like challenge your own assumption?
For me, the biggest takeaway is just that we're not always as in control of our preferences as we might think. We are just bombarded with messages about age and attractiveness, from the media, from our families, our friends, and those messages can really shape our perceptions in ways we don't even realize.
It's a really good reminder to be more mindful of those influences. So what's the one thing you really want our listeners to walk away thinking about today?
I'd say to think about how those media portrayals of age and relationships might be subtly shaping your own perceptions. Next time you're watching a movie or a show, pay attention to the age dynamics between the couples. You might be surprised by what you see. And maybe that awareness can help us all kind of break free from some of those limiting expectations and really celebrate that, beautiful diversity of human attraction.
I love that. It's like a call to action for all of us to be more critical and aware of those subtle messages that we're receiving all the time. And you never know, maybe by questioning those norms, we can actually create a more open and accepting world for everyone to find love and connection, no matter their age. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of age and attraction. Until next time.